identity of like, I just got to find my person. When there's all that pressure to find the person, like, you meet somebody and they check some of those boxes, you're like, this is it, right? She Black, she queer, she Christian, like, this is the best it's gonna get, right? Critical missteps along the way, right? Really not taking time to see, like, are we really compatible in certain ways? Some of the things where I think some of those like red flags in the beginning, we just kind of overlook because we're like, you can fix those, you can get over those, right? And we just never did.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Queerly Blax Show. I'm your host, Ashley, and I'm so happy you came by. The Queerly Blax Show aims to normalize the everyday existence of Black, LGBTQIA+ individuals through an interview-style series with regular folks like you and me. So every week, a new guest shares their story and unique perspective on their existence as an LGBTQIA+ individual. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure you subscribe, download, set your reminders to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Queerly Blax Show. I'm your host, Ashley. I'm joined today by a friend of mine, y'all. I got one of my homies. One of the Howard homies, one of the originals is in the building. Tasha Mitchell. Tasha, tell the people, this is my homie, y'all, from, me and Tasha used to play football together. So gay. I know. So gay. Flag football together. Yes. Tasha, I'm so glad to have you, but introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? My name's Tasha Mitchell. I am currently a pastor, psychotherapist, and PhD student out of Chicago. Not originally from Chicago, I live here now. Originally from Southern California, two-time alum of Howard, went to Vanderbilt with my MDiv, Master of Divinity. So yeah, I'm here, I'm excited, talk about faith, sexuality, spirituality.
Let's get into it. Tasha, what's up, man? It's been a while. Me and Tasha go back like 12 years. What? I think I was a junior.
11.
When you got on the team?
I think 11. Yeah, 11 years.
Yeah, man. It's been a while. Man. Some good times.
Yeah.
Some good times.
I remember some times down in Texas.
Man, New Orleans. Man. Good old days. Yeah. Now we out here. You a pastor. I'm a mom. Like, what has the world come to?
I mean, they letting us do all kinds of things.
They letting us do all kinds of things, man. We out here. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, man. A true story of just evolution in life, and just a great journey that I think will definitely help a lot of people. So super happy to have you. But as we do on this show, we gotta go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
We got to go all the way back.
All the way back.
When you know you like them ladies, man. When you was like, hey man, little shorty caught my attention.
Yeah, so my story's a little bit different. I think mine was just dormant or late or something. Most of my life up until like college, I identified purely as straight, was only attracted to men, as far as I know, as far as I can remember. But then naturally, you get to Howard. Of course it would happen at Howard. There's no better place to go. Right? There's no better place to go to and find attractive like Black women and be like,
yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Hold on now. This has been different than my experience in California, right? So it really didn't happen. Like my first crush happened when I was about 18. No, I was 18, freshman year in college at Howard. And I distinctly remember this incident. I was sitting in the student health center. You know how you used to go in and have to like get all of our shots and everything taken care of. And I was sitting next to this woman, and instantly, like, I was super attracted to her. And at the time, I'm a good Christian girl. I had just come out of like my high school youth group. I was dating a guy from my high school youth group at the time. We were like high school sweethearts. But I'm sitting there and I just like see her, and I was like, I don't know what it is about this woman, but I am like insanely attracted to her. Yeah, so that's like where it kind of started for me, like, 18 years old. And I didn't know what to do with that. So like the logical thing, being the good Christian girl that I was like, well, I got to tell my boyfriend, obviously.
That's wild.
What else do you do, right?
That's wild.
Right. So I was like, well, I'm going to tell him. So I tell him.
You was trying to start a poly relationship. You was like, hey, man, what you think? What you think about that?
See what it do, right?
Add a little shorty to the mix. What's up?
Nah, he's scary. He wouldn't have gone for that. Good little white boy. But yeah, I told him, and he was like, oh, these things just kind of happen in college. And I was like, well, are they happening to you? And he was like, no, no.
You got something you want to share?
Right. He was like, yeah, no, I can't relate. And so I just kind of told some friends and just kind of fell in this space of like, people, I don't know, I just wasn't really getting the responses that I felt like I wanted to get. And so I just kind of defaulted back into that space, that evangelical space of like, this is just spiritual warfare. I just need to acknowledge it, spiritual warfare, and I'm gonna just move on. And so I was able to do that, for a couple years. Didn't really have a crush on anyone for a couple years. Um, until maybe like 5 or 6 years later. And then it started happening again, right? So I was able to like ignore it. I had other boyfriends, I was doing my thing at Howard. And then I had a crush on my coworker. And I was like, oh damn, we're gonna have a problem here. And yeah, so it just started happening more and more. And that's when I started realizing like that's kind of when it all burst open for me. Like there's something else here. And so again, being a good Christian girl, I was in high level of leadership at my church. I told my pastor, because I'd be confessing stuff.
You
like
be confessing.
You gotta confess, right?
Innocently.
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm out here liking these women. I don't know what's going on. And I remember telling my pastor that, and I told her, I'm scared that if I have an experience with a woman, I'm gonna realize I don't like men. And she asked me a question. She said, well, what scares you about that? And that caught me off guard. I was like, what you mean what scares me about that?
Right.
That
Everything.
changes up the whole everything, right? Yeah, so that's kind of like the backstory a little bit. The woman that I had a crush on, so for 6 years had a crush on her. She was actually the first woman that I ever was with 6 years later. So I don't know if everybody's story is like that, but yeah, the first crush I had was the first woman that I was with. So we're still friends, so.
That's amazing.
Did
y'all officially date, or was it just an experience?
It was like the DC kind of like we,
Here,
dating,
let's
not really
just,
together.
Yeah, get your happy hour,
Yeah.
It was
actually, right. It was funny because one night she came over to the house. I was living in a house with other Christian women at the time. We had this rule that no man could spend the night. So I was like, I don't see the problem.
Gray areas,
right? So she spent the night. I think my roommate started to pick up on it after that because they saw her. One of them said something the next morning. They were like, I saw your friend leave early this morning. I was like, oh yeah.
Tasha,
you
misread the rule. You got to expand the rule for yourself.
Listen, I was going by the letter of the law, not the
clearly.
spirit of it.
Clearly, it was black and white for you. Like no men. Okay, she's not a man. All right, cool. We're
right.
Good. Tasha, that wasn't the point. No, it wasn't the point, Tasha.
They should have clarified then. But
that's wild. Okay.
Yeah.
So then
it just kind of developed from there. Yeah.
So then after that, you had your first experience. Was your the person that you had, your coworker that you had the crush on, was this after you had your experience with the first girl, or was this after that?
That was before. That's what started triggering me having conversations about it. I started having conversations with some of my friends who I knew were queer. And one of them was just like, well, you're not gonna know until you sleep with a woman. So you might as well just sleep with somebody and find out. Like, F around and find out. I don't know if I can cuss on the podcast. I'm gonna keep my cuss words.
You're a pastor though, so I mean,
Right. I'm a pastor, but I curse a little bit.
Curse a little bit.
Yeah. So it was just kind of like, I was caught in this space of like, well, I kind of want to. So I started doing that, like go out Saturday night in DC, go to the gay clubs, and then go to church Sunday morning. So I'm trying to, keep my stuff in check. But the woman at work was before I actually started exploring. That's what kind of like prompted it. And so how it actually came to a head. One night I was chilling at home and I was having a bad day. And the woman who I was talking about, the first woman that I had a crush on, she had we were texting back and forth, and she was like, why don't you meet me at the monuments? We'll just like hang out and talk. Super gay shit, right? Like super gay. Like they smooth, they go for the, like,
I'm about to smash. It's given, I'm about to smash.
That's what it's given, right? It gave too, so that's fine.
Hey.
Oh God.
Good times.
Sorry to my church when y'all watch this podcast. They know me.
They're gonna love you for this.
They know me. They've heard my story, so they good. But yeah, we met up at the monuments, and so we were talking. And during the conversation, I just told her, I was like, I've had a crush on you for like 6 years, and she was like, had no idea. And so she was like, well, why don't we link up tomorrow? So we linked up the next day, and
one thing led to another.
Yeah, that was the entry
Here we are
into
on the Queerly Blax Show.
Right.
Talking about Tasha.
Right. The funny thing though was afterwards she was like, are you sure that was your first time? I was like,
hey.
Uh-oh.
Turn it
We
on
in
them,
trouble
Tosh.
now.
Turn
Hey,
it on them, Tosh.
listen, came a little more natural than I thought.
I ain't mad at it. This is crazy
Yeah.
because I mean, okay, so I met you, you were grad
It's about
school?
the same. Yeah, grad
He's
school.
around
So
that
this
same
was,
time?
yeah, it was about a year. I met you about a year later. So I was out by
Okay,
that
so
time.
you was already,
Out,
I was
out.
about to say, because the Tasha I know, okay, wasn't going through no spiritual warfare, okay? There
No.
was
We
no
weren't in
spiritual
that.
warfare.
Not at the time. No.
Not
I
at
had
that
had a
time.
year of processing. But
Yeah.
the year before that, surprisingly, I had actually done an ex-gay ministry because that
Mhm.
was what was suggested by my church. So I had gone through that, and it was through that process where I was like, yeah, I'm not going to struggle. Like, I just came to this conclusion that, like, this is who I was. And that's who, God was fine with me the way that I was, oddly, through that program. But yeah, so I went through that program. And then by the time you had met me, I was like,
In these
this is who I
streets.
am. Yeah. I was in the
What
streets a little bit.
describe what kind of program was that? Like what was that? Because I know there's like I had a guy on here a couple of months ago, Kevin. He had went to what do you call it? Like pray to gay away school.
Yeah.
Just like when you're younger and or you can be older too, but the 12-step kind of program for if you
Hmm.
don't want to be gay. Talk about the program that you went through in particular.
Yeah, so when I came out to my pastor, they were like, "Oh, there's this program whenever somebody comes out, in the evangelical world, they call it having a same-sex attraction or being same-sex attracted, right? That's the language. And there's lots of problems with that. But whenever somebody reveals that they have a same-sex attraction, this is kind of like the program that they send it to. It's an offshoot of something called Exodus International. So Exodus International was like running for like 3 decades, I think. It started in the 70s for people who had a same-sex attraction, wanted to like break free from homosexuality, so to speak. The program that I did was an offshoot of that. So somebody from that program created another program. And so it was operating in the DC area. And it was like a year-long program.
What up? It's your host, Ashley, and I'm interrupting this podcast to ask, are you following us? Have you downloaded the podcast? Are you subscribed to us on YouTube? If you're not already, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on all platforms, Queerly Black. I'm going to let y'all get back to the show. Peace.
The way they got around it being controversial was like they said it was for people who struggle with sexual and relational brokenness. So they kind of
So
grouped
include,
all of these people
put some more
together.
stuff in there. Okay.
Yeah, so it was super problematic, right? Because I'm sitting here and I'm listening to people who have like cheated on their spouse, and I'm like, damn, you gonna equate my attraction?
Right, to this.
Yeah, and so it really messed with me. During that program, though, I will be honest, like that was one of the darkest moments of my life. Like I was having really bad suicidal ideations. I was super depressed. I was just struggling. Like the literature was written really bad, just always talking about like how we were perverted and just like the language that it was using. And I'm doing this for a whole year, right? I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm wrestling spiritually. I'm wrestling at the church. Yeah, like it just got really, really dark there for a minute. And so I remember sitting in my room one day, and I'll remember this clear as day too. Um, I was sitting there praying, and I just felt this like peace. And I just heard God say, no matter where you go, no matter what you decide to do, how you live your life, like I'm always going to be here with you. Like your decisions, my relationship with you is not contingent upon your decisions or like how you live your life. Like it's a constant, right? And that just gave me this peace. And I think that's what started the process of me like really internalizing my identity, becoming comfortable with it, feeling confident in who I was as a queer person. Yeah. So like God, really like the voice of God saved me in many ways, apart from the program, apart from the church, apart from these ways that I had constructed faith over my life. It was really just the voice of God that was like, I don't care what all of this is saying. This is who you are. This is who I am. And we're going to be in a relationship with each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And so then coming out of that program, you is the objective for you to come to some sort of decision on your own about how you move forward, or is there an agenda of like, okay, once you're done with this, you're gonna feel X? Like if you're, let's say, for example, because it seems like they had different things in there. So if you cheated on your wife or your husband, you're supposed to come out of this and never do it again. And if you are gay, you come out of this and you never have those feelings again, or you never have these kind of thoughts, or you get tools to kind of work through this type of emotion. Is that essentially the goal?
Yeah, so when went into the program, they were very clear at the beginning, like, this program is not necessarily to like they didn't wanna give the expectation that we were gonna, like, be changed in some miraculous way, right? I think it was more so, like, trying to give us the tools to see, ourselves in a very evangelical way of looking at humanity, like, this is what God has for you, this is,
Mm-hmm.
like, the norm, this is what is the best, and trying to really like drill that into people and kind of recognizing for them for their perspective like anything contrary to that is outside of the will of God. So you can choose that if you want, but we're going to be really clear like, and so it was like kind of restorative. So it was like a light end game, right? Like it was one of those things where like we're going to try to get you here, but if we don't get you here it ain't our fault, that's on you.
Yeah, we tried our best.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Which kind of leaves you in this weird space of like, well, damn, like the work is really up to me and I gotta fix myself somehow.
yeah.
Odd thing though, funny thing, one of my friends who I did the program with is actually out too. She's married, got a kid. So I was like, well, it ain't
Boom.
work for us. So we have conversations about it. I'm actually gonna talk with her next week. But it was yeah, I was like, some people, it worked, I guess, on the
Yeah,
surface. But for us, it was just like, it ain't
yeah.
work.
Yeah, for sure. No, I feel it. I mean, I think, thank you for explaining that because I think that there are people who live in that space, right? Of like indifference and indecision. Like I have these feelings. I'm getting
Yeah,
guided by my church because as Black people, that is for a lot of us the foundation of what we go back to. Because
yeah,
as we get older, our parents become a little bit of not a source for that, right? And so it's like you go to these safe spaces, and I think people go into a lot of these different programs or books or things with an expectation that it's going to
yeah,
give them some sort of like shift. And the truth is, yourself.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And you're
Yeah.
looking for this because it's scary, when you've been taught to be a certain way and you hear, homophobia in the Black community of like different words and, all this slander about people in the gay community, you have internalized homophobia. You're like, I know who I
Yeah.
am, but like I hate myself for it because
Yeah.
I don't want to be like this. And so people, we go through these different programs and steps to try and become something different. But the truth is we just have to learn how to love ourselves and learn how to
Yeah.
like um come out with this is who I am, and ultimately
Yeah.
just acceptance of who you are and find a different way to articulate how you show
Mhm.
up. That's not what we learned from when we were younger, a lot of times. So I appreciate that description and kind of going into that. So now you are um you're a pastor. But
I'm a
before we
pastor.
before we talk about that, um you were also previously married.
I was previously married. Yeah.
So talk about that journey, going, obviously with the acceptance of your sexuality, then
Mhm.
dating and, moving around. You've also you've lived in a lot of places where even I remember when you were living in Portland and we had connected and I was like, Portland, there are gay people in
Yeah.
Portland? And you were like, yeah, actually, like they have a nice little community here. So talk
Yeah.
about obviously being married. And I know that your marriage kind of transcends some of these places. So kind of you can talk about them in tandem. Um, and living in different places where I mean, even people like me are like, they got gay people there. And
They got gay people.
your experience being married in these places.
Yeah. So my move to Portland was really getting out of all of the mess that had happened in DC. When I came out, I was out at the church for 2 years, finishing my master's program, my first master's program. Had a bad breakup in DC, and then just decided, like, at that time in my life where I was at spiritually, where I was at in my journey, like, I just needed to get out of DC. I needed to get away from that church. So I just was like, I'm gonna move to Portland. It popped up in my head one day. I had visited one, so I'm gonna go there. So I sold all my stuff, moved to Portland, um, and just kind of like started carving my own path. It was the first time in my life where I actually felt like I got to do what I wanted to do, right? Like I was going there with like no agenda. And so I really got to like blossom, right? There is a huge queer community in Portland. Like Portland is one of the gayest cities I've ever lived in. Really big queer population. Had a lot of queer friends. Dated a woman there for we lived together. First time I had lived with a partner. Um,
Fun,
yeah,
huh?
we ended up breaking up, and then
Fun, huh?
what?
I said
It
fun,
was
huh?
fun. We had like that typical queer like Portland life. Like we had this cute little house, garden in the back, so we was growing our own food. We had two cats, you know, so it was just like that typical queer kind of
Mm-hmm.
Portland life. We was living a dream, right? We ultimately found out we weren't super compatible
Mm-hmm.
long term, and so you know things didn't work out. Um, and that's when I had reconnected with my former or my ex-wife. We both went to Howard too. And so we had actually met in DC, reconnected when I was in Portland, and then that's how I ended up in Nashville. I moved there for her. Um, but I tell people what's interesting is because people will ask about the marriage and the divorce, and what I tell people is I think us dating actually had a lot more to do with my evangelical way of understanding the world than I think people realize. Because you know, when you're growing up in the kind of this evangelical world, dating is to get married, right? So there's this
Right.
preoccupation, this fixation on marriage. And so you just got to find your person, right?
Right.
And then you get married so you can enjoy all the benefits of marriage. And so I was still somewhat in that mentality of like, I just got to find my person. When there's all that pressure to find the person, like you meet somebody and they check some of those boxes, you're like, this is it, right? She Black, she queer, she Christian, like this is the best it's gonna get, right?
Mm-hmm.
Critical missteps along the way, right? Really not taking time to see, like, are we really compatible in certain ways? Some of the things where I think some of those like red flags in the beginning, we just kind of overlook because we're like, you can fix those, you can get over those, right? And we just never did. They became more apparent longer in our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say we U-hauled, but like kind of semi U-haul, somewhere in the middle, intermediate
Y'all both had your
U-haul.
own spot, but you was always at her house.
Right. Well, I moved there for her, right? So it was
Yeah.
like we started dating in the spring. I had moved there in the fall and we got engaged in December. So it wasn't that, you know, long of a
Yeah.
time. And we got married like a year
Pretty
later.
short courtship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
longer. We were engaged longer than we had dated.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just kind of made those critical missteps because it was just like, I got to find my person to get married. Because I still had that evangelical, like, you don't just date to date. You don't date to figure yourself out. You don't
Mm-hmm.
date to figure out what you want. You date to get married.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my agenda. And so I made some critical missteps, I think. We both did. Trauma bonded in some ways, have both come off of bad breakups, found comfort in each other, right? When you missing something or lacking something in your relationship and then you start to get it from somebody, it's real
Yeah.
easy to,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
this is everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
I'm a
you've
click with
been
this
missing
person.
that for so long.
Right.
Um, and you know, when you haven't had it, but you've had some of the other stuff, you're like, yeah, no, that's not quite as important because I had that and I wasn't fulfilled. But then you realize like you need that plus
Plus,
this,
it's the plus,
the
right? You
plus.
just got used to what you was missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, oh, I ain't had this. I haven't had this connectedness and this intimacy, and kind of ran with that. And it's not like a fault thing. It's just, you know, we were younger. I think immature to some extent, made some mistakes. You know, I
Yeah.
made mistakes. She made mistakes. But I just ultimately got to the place where I realized like this was probably going to make us long term unhappy. And I just didn't think like it was repairable at that point. And so, yeah, I made the decision to walk away. And I
Yeah.
don't regret that decision at all. Not from a place of spite, just I really do believe that that was the best decision for us.
Yeah.
Which is also
Um,
hard too, because you know some people will be like, "Well, you wasn't supposed to get married in the first place," so that
right,
was just
right,
God correcting that mistake.
right, right. Idiots. Um, right. Um, so then I want to go here a little bit. So because now you're dating, right? You're out of that and you're dating. And so you talk about a few things that I think are super duper critical, right? Is one, the level of discernment that you have going into that process of like, okay, I'm not wasting my time. I think going back to just the foundational principles of like what your kind of values are rooted in, right?
Yeah.
Going into dating is a very specific process, but you and we've we're friends, so we've talked, and I know that for you, going into dating is like, I'm not wasting my time, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
wasting my time. So where did you get to a place of like, I'm not going to waste my time? And you took some learnings. One of the things you talk about is like the critical missteps of your marriage. So talk about not in any level of detail, because I always say marriage is a very personal thing. I don't want to know the details of your marriage, but I want to know, going into dating, those categories of critical like missteps. What are those things that are super important? And then I'm gonna add another complex thing here, because you're very educated.
Yeah.
How do you not form a relationship on a trauma bond?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I'm still learning that, right? Like I've even made that mistake since I've gotten divorced to some extent. I will say honestly, in all honesty, when I first got divorced, I was like, I want to commit to like being single for a year. So after I got divorced, I was in these streets for a year. I'm not gonna lie. Like I was out there because I had never given myself that space to really just be like, I ain't really dated. I ain't really had some frivolous fun. I ain't really just got to like connect with people. And like, I've never given myself that space. I was like serial monogamous. I was in serious relationships back to back. So yeah, I think part of that was crucial though for me, because it was like taking that time. One thing I did realize in that time was what I didn't want, right? So you should take some time to realize what you don't want, right? Like, I don't know all the things that I want, but I know I don't like this and this and this, right? I spent some time, realizing that. Going in, and so I did that whole thing for a year. I've been single for about a year and a half, and now I'm kind of moving into the space of like being more open to like the idea of potentially pursuing something serious, something maybe monogamous. I haven't been very monogamous since I got divorced, and that was intentional. But now, rethinking some of that, right? Trying to date and not forming trauma bonds. And I've had to learn this myself, right? I'm still learning this. How do you do that? I was listening to some like dating expert online or something. And they were talking about how like when you first meet somebody, one way to not trauma bond is to not initially go for super serious, intense baggage when you start talking, right? So resist the temptation to sit on that first date and spend 6 hours all night talking about all the trauma you done been through. And like, that's a good way, right? You don't start off with all of that. Get to know a person, find out the things that they like do some things that are like more lighthearted, right? Don't dive in with a serious, like that's not necessarily wasting time. Like you can get to some of that. But yeah, not forming that bond from just like not talking about your former relationship, your former partner, right? Because now we're just coming from a place of like, these are all the ways that I've been hurt. And you're communicating to your partner, like, or to the person that you're talking to, not partner at the time. Like almost like putting that pressure on them, right? Like dumping all of this on like, is this you? And they might be like, oh, I had the same thing. And literally now you got right, like is that you?
Just get up right now and walk away, because if it's you, it's deuces.
Yeah. So I think taking some time at the beginning to get to know a person outside of just their baggage and their trauma and their history, and their former relationships, like taking time to actually get to know somebody, I think is a much better bet. Rather than just sitting here and dumping on each other. Because right, we love to do that. Especially women love to do that. We love to go for the emotional.
Yeah.
Because you hear it, right? It's like, oh, I hear all the things that person did. I don't want to do it. So I'm gonna start doing all the other stuff.
Yeah.
That is a trauma bond.
Yeah.
You are bonding to their trauma.
Yeah. But then it's like crazy because I've been out of the streets for forever.
You've been out of the streets, literally.
I stay out there. I'm staying out the way. I look, we good. I'm good. I'm out the streets, man. Look, but you hear people talk about like, you dating and like, oh, we want to get, I don't want to waste my time. I want to get to the serious, like you want to get to the serious so quickly, but not realizing that this is what happens, right? Is that you, without really, learning a person, right? Like, what's your favorite color? Like, do you like to wake up in the morning? Like, do you wake up early? Do you wake up late? Like, do you, who are you? What is your real hair color? Like, what, you know what I'm saying? When you wake up, like, are you angry? Are you like a nice person? Like, do you exercise in the morning? Like, without developing the character, right? Then getting to, some of those inner layers, this is what happens, right? And so then you miss all the rest of that. You miss the fact that they're really an angry person in the morning. You probably really shouldn't talk to them. That they don't like to text, or that they don't like to talk on the phone, or that they, they let their gas tank get to E before they actually go fill it up. That they, like you miss the person. Like now all the things about the person go to the back burner. So then you live with them, or you start forming this life, and you're like, you really annoy the shit out of me. Like I didn't realize like how much you fucking annoy me because I didn't
nerves.
Because I don't know you. Yeah. All I know is your trauma, and so to me, I challenge that notion of like, I think it's important to know a person's morals, a person's values. Are you a Christian? Are you, how does that translate into your life? So when I think about serious topics, I want to know those things. Are you a family person? Do you have kids? Do you, I don't care about the baby mother, but do you have children, and are you in their life? Because that tells me that you're a responsible person, right? Not about you and your ex and how bad she is and how she keeps the kids from you. And I don't care about that part, but are you a family person, right? Like how do you, how do you show up? Christmases, are you by yourself, or do you travel to be with your family? That to me, if we're going to talk about serious things, let me develop your character, but not talk about the drama that comes with it. I don't want to know about, all the mess of your family before I ever know you, because now I'm like, damn, my family's screwed up too. Like now we're bonding on that, but you're a part of the drama of your family. I'm not.
Right.
So, but I, again, I think super critical topic because people are dating, right? Like, obviously yourself, but, in others, and this is how relationships are forming. And then, we're settling down and we're, forming lives. We got kids, we got all this stuff with people that we don't like. Like we legit don't like you. Like I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, damn, like
I love you, but I don't like you. And
exactly. And I think, me and my wife, we had the fortune of being friends first, number one, but then also we went through life together. Like we went through college together. So we saw each other, we know each other. Like I know you, I know how you wake up, I know how you go to sleep. I know all the things. And I chose to say, okay, these are all things that are good for me. And you made that same decision. Right. And so I think, I just think that's super critical for people to understand, like that the trauma bonding is real, and
it's super real. People are doing it.
Yeah. You got to know who you laying down with, because you don't lay down with you do lay down with the trauma, but you wake up and lay down every day with that person, like who they are, So, good talk. So now you're a pastor. How do we arrive here?
Oh, that's kind of a story. Short, the bridge version. Interned at my church that I grew up in over the summer when I was 19, in between my freshman and sophomore years in college. And it was through that program, like just interning, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, or this is one of the things that I want to do with my life. I was studying psychology at the time. And I'm now in a doctoral program that kind of brings religion and psychology together. It's called a field of pastoral theology. But yeah, I interned there and just like got to preach and got to help with the youth ministry and was like, this is where I really want to be. And so it was like this long 16-year journey, right? Because it's like, one, being a woman is a little complicated when you talk about ministry, being a Black woman. And then, at that time, what would it have been 5 years later, coming into this identity of being queer. So by the time I hit 24 and, came out, I was like, oh shit, this ain't finna happen, Captain. I don't know where a Black queer woman can just find a pulpit, right? Because I've said this before, like if you're white or Black to some extent, a male, halfway attractive and charismatic, church will give you the keys to the kingdom, right? 100%. You can be an expert, you can be the senior pastor, don't matter if you've had training, like if you have those qualities, you're good to go, right? Even when I was in seminary, I was, around other people, like Black men, who they like, I've been preaching since I was 16, and I'm like, man, I can barely be in like lay leadership in a church being a Black queer woman, right? So that just kind of led me down this path, and I think God has like definitely had me on this path that seemed really winding, but purposeful behind the scenes, and I didn't see that, right? So I ended up getting a Master of Education in Counseling. So I'm working towards my licensure as a psychotherapist, as an LCPC. And then I ended up circling back, wanting to go to seminary. So I went to seminary to get theological training. Got an MDiv, which a lot of pastors don't have, right? So I'm 2 master's degrees in, right? And it was after that, literally the summer after that, was when I got approached by the first church to like come on staff where I'm at now. It's called New Story Chicago, up here in Chicago on the north side. little did I know I had a conversation with a pastor that spring because I knew I was moving up to Chicago. I got into the doctoral program, knew I wanted to be a pastor, right? But I was like, I just need to find a church to go to while I'm, trying to discern and figure out where I want to go from here. Um, and we had a conversation in the spring, and I didn't know, but when he got off that call, he told his wife and his daughter, that's going to be our church's next pastor.
Oh,
And I
nice.
didn't know
That's
that,
what's up.
right? So
Yeah.
for months, he had been just kind of like behind the scenes, like, yeah, I'm gonna get her on staff. And so I ended up coming on staff in September of last year, of 2021.
Nice.
So yeah, it was like a long, windy road, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of discernment, a lot of disappointment of just like seeing a lot of closed doors and not really understanding like that God was working behind the scenes, right? Because now I literally have 2 degrees, 2 professions that help me as a pastor. And I'm doing a doctoral program that required both of those degrees. These seemingly disparate areas, that I didn't think would go together. And God's like, no, I'm pulling this all together. You just got to trust the process. Like, forget what the world is telling you, right? If you ain't learned something yet in this lifetime, forget what the
listen
world
to
is
them.
telling
Yeah.
you. And I can even talk about that. My theology around like how I come to terms with being comfortable as a queer person comes with that theology of understanding who I am, created in the image of God. Goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We could talk about that in a minute. That's an aside, right? I actually preached on that recently about sexuality and where I find an anchor in the Garden of Eden to affirm myself, right? And to affirm queer folk. But yeah, just kind of got into the doctoral program, moved up here, got offered, the pastoral position. But 16 years later, right, get a calling in 1935. That's when I become a pastor, right? Jesus took 30 years to prepare for the 3 years of ministry. If Jesus took 30 years, sometimes you got to trust that the process might not look the way that you expect it to. It might take longer. Might be a lot of detours, but trust God's prep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, life is not linear, right? Like it's just simply not, because I'm sure that in the 19-year-old version of yourself, you probably weren't queer either.
No, well, I mean, I was thinking about
you were, but you weren't. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think that there that added complexity that you had to work through, right, to make the ministry that much sweeter, right? Is that you went through that process. So you alluded to it already, but like talk about your journey of becoming comfortable with your sexuality through all of this, right? Like, we also didn't talk about you coming out, to, actually having those conversations with your parents and, all the people that you had to talk to. But talk about your journey of becoming comfortable.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm out now, because I feel like when there are still sometimes people who are like, I didn't know you were queer. And I'm like, I've been out. I done put this on Facebook years ago. I done been in a whole marriage I don't know how people don't know. And for the record, I identify on the BiPAN spectrum. So I did have that experience of like realizing when I was with women, or when I was with the first woman that I was with, I had this really interesting experience of like, I liked that, but it didn't negate the fact that I was still attracted to men. And so I just kind of like had developed, at the time, identified as bisexual. Now I say I'm on the BiPAN spectrum because that language just wasn't available at the time.
Describe that for people who may not know what you
BiPAN spectrum. So, there's bisexuality, where it's like I'm attracted to men and women, and then pansexuality, which I think is much more expansive and kind of opens it up to like, I'm attracted to people regardless of their gender or gender expression, right? And so I sit somewhere between those two, not neatly in either camp. Now, when people I know don't understand that language, I'll just tell them I'm bisexual because I don't feel like having that conversation.
Right.
If I feel like they understand the language, I'll tell them I'm on the BiPAN spectrum. People are really fearful of pansexuality. And so that's a whole other thing. There's a lot of BiPAN phobia in the queer community.
Yeah, 100%.
There's a lot of trans phobia in the queer community.
100%.
And so I think my sexuality, even the way like my gender expression doesn't always sit neatly. Like it makes some people uncomfortable because they're like, are you a stud or a femme? And
I'm like, nope. You like a soft, like a soft stud stem type.
Yeah, I describe myself, I hate boxes. I describe myself as androgynous but femme of center.
Yes, that's real.
Yeah, so I sit in this androgynous camp. I'm like a gender bender. Like, you don't know what you're gonna get from me.
No, day, right? This is true. You've always been, as long as I've known you, you've always kind of been like that too. But always like on a softer side though. Like,
right. Yeah,
she got on a jersey, but her eyebrows done. You know what I'm
Right. She got a
saying?
little
Like,
makeup on.
yeah,
Right.
a little lipstick, you know.
Right. She got a bow tie on and some
Yeah.
lipstick.
Little
Like, what
pearl
is going
necklace.
on here?
What are we doing right
Right.
now? What's going on?
I'll throw a dress on, some make.
Quick.
I have my face be
Yeah.
heels. I'll go to the club and storm, and the next day be sitting in like joggers and basketball, you know, some Jordans and be chilling. Right.
But that's the goal,
That's
is
just how I
that like we
express.
can all just do whatever, and it's okay,
Yeah.
you know, and we don't have to
Yeah.
put it in a box or put it in language. But so BiPAN.
Yeah, sitting in this space of like, I'm not gender queer, I identify as a cisgender woman, but my gender expression is more expansive, I think, than your typical cisgender woman, or you know, a femme or a stud or whatever, a butch or a femme. Which is, you know, part of my journey to becoming comfortable with my sexuality and my expression, right? So this kind of go back to my theology. I taught about this actually a couple of months ago at a local church here called Lighthouse, but I went back to the garden, right? And so what I look at, like when I see the Garden of Eden, right? There's these human beings that were created in the image of God, the Imago Dei, created perfectly, right? And then you have this serpent that comes and says, like, "Are you sure if you eat this fruit from this tree that God told you not to?" Like, God really just doesn't want you to be like God. So what I see in the Garden of Eden, this first temptation and this first sin is really tempting you to believe that you are other than what God created you to be. And the sin is falling into that and doing the things that will try to fulfill that narrative, right? Like, no, you were created perfectly in the
Yeah.
image of God.
Yeah.
Who you were created to be is who you are.
Yeah.
The sin to me is really rejecting that and
Yeah.
rejecting that image of God. And so for me, it's like, no, like I became comfortable with myself because I was like, I was created in the image of God. The temptation and the sin is to hear what Christianity has to say or what the world has to say, tempting me to believe otherwise, saying, no, you're dirty. No, you're foul. No, you're a sinner. No, you're fundamentally flawed. No, when we go back to the Garden of Eden, that's the opposite of what happened, right?
Yeah.
Because then they said, they go to God, you know, after they eat the apple, they say, you know, oh, we're naked and we're ashamed, right? God said, who told you you were naked? Nakedness was not the problem. It was the perception of the nakedness that was.
Yeah.
I'm preaching now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the pastor me preaching now, right? So yeah, that's what I think the sin actually was. The temptation was to believe that we were not created in the image of God. And the sin is to try to now take on some other narrative, right? To fundamentally reject who I am.
Yeah.
That's the sin.
Yeah.
That's what I see in the Garden of the Eden.
Yeah.
So if I believe that I was created in the image of God, and this is like, I would love for everybody in this podcast to know that, like, you were created in the image of God, and God wants you to be exactly who you are. And the sin is to reject that.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
So I want to push that a little bit and ask you this, right? Because I think that some would argue that if you're transgender, right?
Yeah.
If God created you perfectly, then changing yourself in that way goes against that, right?
Yeah.
How does that fall into that space?
Yeah, well, I would argue, I mean, to counter that argument, I would be like, well, now we're just talking about one level of identity and existence and being, right? What you're talking about is a very limited perspective. Like, it's just this physical aspect, right? Or
Right.
what we would consider like this biological basis, so to speak. But that's only one aspect of a person, right? So it's like, what if, is it possible that God did inherently create something inside of you, the deepest part of who you are? And now the journey is living in that, because there's a lot of ways that like what's inside of us and how we feel and like our experience with the world or our externalities don't always match up, right? And there's a tension, and that's a part of being human, and that's a part of life. Like, we all experience that, whether it's our gender or not. So I would really look at the core of who a person is, right?
Yeah.
That, because some people would make the same argument about being queer, like, well,
Yeah.
your body was made a certain way to fit with this body.
Yeah, absolutely.
That
Right.
negates what is going on internally, the core identity of a person, right?
Yeah.
So I would argue, like, getting to the core identity of a person, and I trust the person to know who their core identity is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that, because it goes to what I believe, which is that those are just one level of who you are, right? It's an important level. It's a part that is critical for most of us. It's critical for really everybody. I mean, how you feel comfortable in yourself is very important, and it's hard to get to the rest of it sometimes if you're not comfortable. But I mean, you put that perfectly, just that, there's other parts of you, and just because what you change on yourself doesn't change who you are. Like, you're still who, if you're, a man, you change yourself to a woman, you're still at the core. If you're a good person, you're a good person. If you're, if you're a thief, you're a thief. If if you know what I'm saying? Like, what those parts of you are still there. It's just, it shows up, in a different way. So you put that perfectly.
And it's the constructs too, right? It's how we construct femininity, masculinity, male and female, right? Yes, to some extent we can talk about like biology, but I'm sure there are biologists that could deconstruct that for us, right? I've heard biologists deconstruct this.
For sure.
A lot of these things are constructs, right? So is it perhaps that our constructs of what it means to be masculine or feminine, male or female, actually might be much more queer than we understand? This queer term is like not beyond the norm, right? This queering sense of like understanding these constructs. When we start to see it that way, then it's like, no, there might actually not be a discrepancy there with like, no, I was born this way. Maybe I'm just teaching you a little bit more about what it means to be masculine or feminine, or how these fit outside of the norms that your brain and your systems of oppression have created this world to fit neatly in a box, right? I exist outside of that box, and that threatens you. So maybe it's really your misunderstanding of it.
Yeah, well, and it's also, I mean, we ain't got to go here, but it's also the denial of intersexuality. We don't even talk about that. Like, no one talks about the fact that, I think it was like one in every 1,000 people are born intersex, and so I think if we bring that into the equation, then our gender construct is really screwed up, because where do they fit? Nowhere. Which is why we don't talk about it, because it makes people uncomfortable. Right, it's too confusing to add that in, right? And so, it's very complicated and very loaded, and so that's why we're here to help some people. Last question, and then we're gonna play a game.
Okay.
Is it for a person who's out there just kind of going through their own process, and they're battling with all the things that they were taught growing up, and now they're forming their own identity, going through their own queer journey. Give them, whether it be a scripture, just a word of encouragement, or a place that they can go, whether it be the Bible or some sort of devotion to kind of help get, grounded in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would still go back to like what I was preaching on. And if y'all want to look up Lighthouse Church, United Church of Christ in Chicago, I think it was like last week of September. I taught on this, and that could actually be like, it was a message literally speaking to this. And I do feel like it was restorative, right? Because I break down like scripture, and I talk about the Garden of Eden. But yeah, just like really wanting to encourage people that like, if you don't hear it from anyone else, like, you were created in the image of God. Like, God loves you at the core, like at the start of scripture. Like, God creates human beings in God's image, and God says this is like great, and this is perfect, and this is beautiful. And at the core of who we are, like, we were not fundamentally created broken, sinful. I don't believe in that theology. Like, God creates with perfection in mind. God creates with God's self in mind, right? Like, you are fundamentally loved by God. There is nothing that you can do to separate yourself from the love of God, right? Going back to some of these deeper biblical truths, right? What is the spirit of the law, right? Like, God loves creation. God created, and God would never like hate God's own creation. So I would tell people, encourage them, like, go back to the fundamentals. What do you honestly believe about God? One thing about my journey was like the place where I really hit a point that came to a head was I had what the church was telling me, what I believed about God, and then I had personal experience. And those three were colliding. So what I determined was my experience was not a lie. What I believed about God was not a lie. The problem that I had to fix or address was what the world was telling me. The world that, this narrative that the world had created. And for me, it was in charismatic evangelicalism. So go back to the core, go back to the fundamentals. Do I believe that God loves me? Do I believe that I was created in the image of God? Do I believe that there is nothing that can separate me from the love of God? Scripture says that, right? That's where you start to unpack that and rest, at least in that space,
Yeah.
and go from there.
Yeah. 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 No, I love it. I love it. Cool, man. Well, thank you for that. Hope y'all learned something.
Yeah. I feel like
Now we're
I
gonna
be
play a little
preaching when I get
game.
on these. Okay.
We're gonna play a game of this or that. And then
Okay.
I'm gonna let you
Oh
go.
God. This or that.
Sports bra or underwire bra?
Oh, I don't like sport. Well, I wear both, but I wear bras that don't have a wire in it. So like a regular bra, but no wire. So it's kind of
Okay.
like a mix.
Yeah, I got you. Laundry or cooking?
Cooking. I can throw
Day
down in
at
the
the
kitchen.
day at the spa or watching sports all day?
Oh, can I do like half and half? Ah, that would be a hard one. I do like sports, but if I had to choose, I'll go with day at the spa.
Short hair or long hair? Your hair
I like short hair on me, but I do like
on
long
long hair
hair on
on the
other people.
shorties.
Yeah. All the ones
Ha!
that I'm attracted to typically have like lobster
Long
long
hair,
hair.
baby. Don't cut
Yeah.
that hair. Lipstick or lip gloss?
I like both. I wear lip gloss more than I wear lipstick. I have both on right now.
Sports car or big truck?
Oh, I would have a sports car.
Big wedding or small ceremony?
Small ceremony. These weddings cost too damn much.
Man, what? Stay up late or sleep in?
Sleep in. Oh, either or, like sleep in.
Iron or re-dry it?
I'll be throwing that shit in the dryer.
Oh my
If
God.
I can, I'll throw it in the dryer. I don't mind
Jesus.
ironing, but I'll throw it in the dryer if I can.
Lord. Pay or have her pay?
I typically pay a lot and it throws people off.
New shoes or new clothes?
I do like new clothes. Like a good fit.
Pillow princess or I'm on top?
I'm a switch and a verse. I can't pick. I'm a switch and a
Hey,
verse through and through.
equal
So like,
equal opportunity over here, y'all.
listen, if that's not your life, do not come at me because I'm gonna do some shit you don't
EEO on
like.
EEO over here, y'all.
I am very switch verse. So neither. I can't.
Love it. Neither or both.
Both. Yeah, I can't. Well, I would say I prefer to be on top of princess.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for indulging. Where can the people find you?
Where can they find me? On Instagram. So my handle is Adventure Altruist. It's a spin on venture capitalist. Whereas venture capitalists are like, I'm gonna capitalize off what you have. I'm like, I'm gonna take what I have and try to just better the world from an altruistic perspective. So that's my handle. And New Story Chicago, you can find us. That's a church that I co-pastor. On Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We live stream our services on Facebook and YouTube. Yeah, we meet up here on the north side for people who are in Chicago. If you want to come check us out, we are currently meeting at a church called Edgewater Presbyterian, but in February we're going to be moving to Granville United Methodist at 11:30. So yeah, you can find me in Chicago on the north side at Granville UMC, or on Instagram. You can add me on Facebook, but I be on Instagram more.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much, Tosh, for coming through. The homie, y'all. That's the homie.
Yeah.
Y'all go check her out. Really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing. And y'all already know, man. It's another episode of Queerly Blax Show. I'm your host, Ashley. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.